Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and it's quiet, so I'm able to record in my office for our Bible study recap today. And for our Bible study today, we're continuing through the book of Job, and so we read the second chapter of Job. And just if you look at this text, right, if you just look at Job 2 after reading Job 1 last week, you're going to notice that the beginning here is basically a carbon copy of what we saw last week, which is God and Satan, right? And again, there's this heavenly court. Satan comes. God asks him where he was. He says, I'm walking to and fro on the earth, right? And then again, God says, have you considered my servant Job, how righteous he is? Yada, 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 right? Not to yada, yada, yada God's words, but he says exactly what he said last week. And then it gets to the point where Satan says, flesh for flesh, right? Because God basically says, you tried to say that he would desert me, right? You attacked him without reason, and he didn't, right? And so Satan then says, flesh for flesh. If I attack his health, if I attack his body, then he will turn against you, right? So we have Satan moving the goalposts here. A very interesting interaction. Again, like we saw last week, God gives Satan the power to attack Job. The only thing is that Satan has to safeguard his life. Some of the text says spare, like some translations will say spare. It has this yes, that is what it is, but it has this idea of saying like you have to protect him though, like you can't kill him, and if anything happens to him, then it's on you, right? And so Satan is given the power to strike Job with health affliction, and he does. He attacks him, and he gives him these boils that end up all over his body, covering him from his head to his feet. And he's in either, he's in extreme discomfort, right? He sits on a pile of ash, which is a way of showing warning, but also at the time was seen as kind of like a disinfectant, because it usually means that things were burned around you, so you couldn't spread anything to anyone else, right? So he's sitting on this pile of ash. He's scratching himself with this shard of pottery that he found to try and relieve whatever pain or irritation he has. And that's where he is. And then his wife comes, right? Who we didn't see last week, but she's here now. And her advice to him is curse God and die. Now, you can read this. A lot of people read this in a uncharitable light. I mean, that's actually how I think it's meant. I don't think it's meant to be charitable, but you could kind of read it in two ways just to give the wife her due credit. I mean, both of them are wrong, but one is less bad than the other. The first is that she's just saying, just end your suffering now. Just die, right? Curse God. He's abandoned you and die, right? She's giving him bad advice. The second one could be understanding that if he just curses God, then God will just kill him and put him out of his misery, right? And it's like as a nice thing to do rather than as an angry thing. Either way, it's bad advice, right? You're not supposed to do that. And Job responds and calls her, "You're talking like a foolish woman, like foolish women do." We, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we looked a little bit more at this in depth in Bible study. But fool in the Bible doesn't actually mean stupid. It can mean like we can give it that connotation, but actually, what it really has to do with is this idea of lacking faith, or apostatizing, because like in Psalms 14:1, a fool says in his heart there is no God, right? Or Jesus, this was brought up, and this is a wonderful example in Bible study. Jesus said a fool builds his house upon the sand, right? And it's someone who doesn't have the proper faith or turns away from the faith, right? That's considered someone who's a fool. So Job's wife, he's calling her, you're speaking like a foolish woman. It's not saying that women are stupid or that you're being stupid. You're speaking as though someone who is blaspheming God, right? Turning away from God. And that's bad. And he says, if God can give us good things, he can give us bad things as well. And we have to accept that. And that's a part of Job's answer to the problem of evil. But that's it, right? He sits there, and then his friends show up, these three guys, and they come, and it's fun trying to say their names, making people try and say their names. But they come, they sit down with him, and they can't even recognize him from a distance because of how the boils have disfigured him. And when they see what has happened to him, they weep and they lament and they tear their clothes and they sit there and they all sit in silence for 7 days, which is sitting Shiva. This is still a Jewish tradition in many Jewish households. And the idea here is that you sit with someone in their grief and you don't say anything to them. Many times you bring them food and other things like that. And traditionally it's that person who has to break the silence. So as soon as they start talking, then you're able to talk back to them. So they're sitting around for 7 days waiting for Job to start talking, and that's where we're going to get to next week. And so we're going to see what Job has to say, but after he's had some time to think about it. But again, Job proves himself righteous, right? He doesn't do anything wrong here. And we can easily take this situation, as many of us did, and this morning, as I encourage people to do, is take it out of the story, right? And take these things and put it today. So we talked about how maybe a good parallel for the boils that Job gets is cancer, right? This thing that would be seen as the one thing that you don't want to get when you go to the doctor, right? If we went to the doctor today and they said, oh, you have, I don't know, I don't want to say monkeypox. If you have smallpox or something, right? Or shingles, something comparable, right? These things on your body that are really painful and things like that. Yeah, that sucks, right? That's not great. But it's not the same, because we know it can be cured. We know it can go away. But it's not the same as going and being like, oh, you have cancer, right? That's kind of the equivalent that Job is getting here. And so we take that, right? And we put ourselves in situations that maybe we've experienced, we've seen our family and friends experience. And it causes us to say, oh, why does this happen, right? What is the purpose in these things? Same thing, we brought up the shooting, again, the tragedy in Texas. Like, why is that? And Job gives us a very good response here, although one that maybe we don't always find satisfying, though we're going to get to it later. We're going to work through it together, right? This is the point of the book of Job. This idea that God can give things and God can take them away, right? And it's learning to live in the sovereignty of God. That's kind of the point of Job. So we're going to get into that. Job Job struggles with that as well. That's why Job is a wonderful person for us to attach ourselves to, and a wonderful test case about this, because as we're going to see, the rest of this book, basically the entire thing, is Job dialoguing with his friends about why this happened to him. So next week, we're going to see Job's side of the story, and then we'll get into some of his friends' responses the weeks after. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. You guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and peace out.